In 1930, a French anthropologist arrived in Mali carrying notebooks and assumptions. He expected to find what colonialism had always promised him he would find: primitive people, primitive minds, a primitive understanding of the universe. What he found instead shattered every calculation they had built their superiority upon. The Dogon people of Mali possessed a precise, documented, transmittable knowledge of Sirius B, a star so small and so dim that Western astronomy did not photograph it until 1970. They could not see it. No telescope on Earth had confirmed it until 1862. And yet, the Dogon had encoded its orbital period, its mass density, and its elliptical trajectory into their ceremonial cosmology for centuries before any European pointed a lens at the sky. The Dogon people of Mali possessed a precise, documented, transmittable knowledge of Sirius B, a star so small and so dim that Western astronomy did not photograph it until 1970. They could not see it. No telescope on Earth had confirmed it until 1862. And yet, the Dogon had encoded its orbital period, its mass density, and its elliptical trajectory into their ceremonial cosmology for centuries before any European pointed a lens at the sky. Before we examine what the Dogon knew, we must first understand how a people build a cosmological knowledge system, because European academia spent decades asking the wrong question. They asked, where did the Dogon get this information? As though the only legitimate source of astronomical knowledge was a European observatory. The correct question, the sovereign question, is this: what intellectual infrastructure did the Dogon construct that made this knowledge possible? Dogon cosmology is not folklore dressed in star names. It is a unified theoretical framework, linking agriculture, human biology, social structure, and celestial mechanics into a single, internally consistent system of knowledge. Scholar Malidoma Patris Samay, a Dagara elder and academic trained at the Sorbonne and Brandeis University, writes that West African indigenous intellectual traditions operate through what he calls living knowledge, a system where information is not stored in libraries, but in bodies, rituals, and relational memory, transmitted with mathematical precision across generations. Consider this. The Dogon Sigwi ceremony, one of their most sacred rites, occurs on a 60-year cycle. That cycle corresponds to the conjunction period of Jupiter and Saturn, a celestial event that takes 59.6 years to complete. This is not metaphor. This is precision measurement encoded into living ceremony. They were not worshiping the stars randomly. They were tracking them systematically. Agot Merli, a blind Dogon elder whose knowledge was so vast, so architecturally complex, that Marcel Graillot spent 33 days in continuous recorded dialogue with him, described Sirius B as the smallest and heaviest of all stars. In the language of modern astrophysics, Sirius B is a white dwarf, with a mass roughly equal to the Sun compressed into a sphere the size of Earth. Its density is approximately 90,000 times that of water. Agot Merli did not have a spectrometer. He had something older and arguably more sophisticated, a tradition of rigorous intellectual inheritance. We speak of stars, but let us not float too far from the Earth our ancestors stood on, because the Dogon were not simply astronomers gazing upward. They were engineers, agriculturalists, architects, and sovereign city planners who built a civilization so functionally integrated with their environment that their villages themselves were cosmological instruments. A Dogon village is not built at random. The settlement pattern follows a precise anthropomorphic cosmological blueprint. The layout of the village mirrors the human body, which in Dogon cosmology mirrors the structure of the universe. The smithy represents the head. The altars of the family are the chest cavity. This is fractal architecture, the same pattern replicated at every scale, from the body of a person to the body of a settlement to the body of the cosmos. This was not superstition. This was a unified theory of existence built in mud, wood, and stone. Recent LIDAR archaeological surveys across West African plateau systems have begun to confirm what oral tradition has always insisted upon. The Bandiagara landscape is not simply inhabited, it is engineered. Ancient terracing systems, water management channels, and ceremonial pathways cut into the rock reveal a civilization that shaped its environment with the same deliberate intelligence it applied to its understanding of the heavens. The ancestors received is building the archive that was taken from us, one documentary, one suppressed truth, one recovered legacy at a time. If this film moved you, join the community, subscribe, share, and tell us in the comments, which civilization do you want us to investigate next? We are listening. The ancestors are listening, and the archive is open. This intellectual sovereignty extended into every domain of daily life. Dogon textile weaving encodes astronomical grids into its patterns. Dogon iron smelting practices align furnace activation with specific stellar positions. Their agricultural calendar, determining planting, harvest, and rest cycles, is a heliocentric document, reading the sky the way a scientist reads a dashboard. We were not primitive, we were precise. Now we must discuss what happened next. Because the existence of this knowledge created a problem, not for the Dogon, but for the architecture of colonial ideology that required African people to be intellectual objects rather than intellectual authorities. The colonial project was never only about land. It was about the ownership of human capacity. To justify the theft of a continent, they first had to steal something more intimate, the idea that African minds were capable of producing civilization, philosophy, science, and architecture without European intervention. The Dogon's astronomical knowledge represented an existential threat to that narrative, because it could not be explained away. And so they tried a different erasure. When the knowledge could not be denied, it was reframed. Academic journals repositioned Dogon cosmology as remarkable coincidence. Later theorists, most notoriously, the 1976 publication by Robert Temple, attempted to explain the Dogon's knowledge by claiming extraterrestrial contact. Think carefully about what that argument requires you to believe. That an African people were more likely to have been visited by aliens than to have developed their own sophisticated astronomical tradition. This is not scholarship. This is colonial anxiety wearing a spacesuit. Dr. Agabara Dauma, a Malian physician and scientist, one of the most decorated researchers in the history of the University of Mali, argued that the refusal to accept indigenous African intellectual production on its own terms represents what scholar Oy E grave R O acute NK letter 1 EB9 acute Oyumi calls the epistemological colonization of African thought. They did not merely take our land. They attempted to take our credibility as thinkers. Amadou Hampâté Bâ, Malian author, oral historian, and the man who brought West African intellectual tradition to the floor of UNESCO, understood the stakes. When they burned the libraries, they did not always use fire. Sometimes they used footnotes. Sometimes they used silence. Sometimes they used the word primitive. We are done with that word. Here is what the archive actually shows us when we read it with sovereign eyes. The Dogon people built an astronomical observatory without walls. They encoded their data in ceremony, in textile, in architecture, in oral recitation, in systems so robust that 700 years of weather, colonization, and academic dismissal could not erase them. Their knowledge of Sirius B, its orbital period of 50 years, its rotational axis, its position relative to Sirius A, was not the result of accident. It was the result of generations of disciplined, organized, transmitted intellectual labor. This is what civilization looks like when it does not need external validation to know its own worth. We, the descendants of those who built knowledge systems in the rock and in the sky, did not need a telescope to see the truth. We needed the courage to look. We needed the discipline to record. We needed the love of our children to transmit. They tried to tell you that your ancestors lived in darkness, but your ancestors were mapping the darkness, nomming its stars, measuring its distances, encoding its rhythms into the living memory of a people who understood that knowledge is sovereignty, and sovereignty is survival. The Dogon did not receive their knowledge from the stars as a gift from the gods of another civilization. They earned it through centuries of observation, intellectual discipline, and an unshakable commitment to understanding the universe they inhabited. That is the receipt. That is the archive. That is the ancestors' truth, and it was never lost. It was only waiting for us to come back and claim it.